Welcome to this great panel on the future of securities exchanges. My name is Jason Yanowitz. I'm one of the co-founders of BlockWorks Group. We're a media company that helps investors understand the emerging crypto space. This panel is obviously not about me, though. Today, we're joined by 4 leaders from the institutional world of crypto and finance. Today, we'll talk about everything from tokenization to regulation, to DeFi, and to different go-to-market and sales and marketing strategies for these different companies. We have 30 minutes today, so we're going to cruise through it, but I think it'll be really interesting. I would just ask that all the participants just have their mics muted if they're not speaking. And so before diving in, though, why don't we kick it off with a few just introductions. Let's keep them short and sweet. Ziv, if you want to kick us off, and then we can go over to Graham, then Hugo, and then Seamus, and we can jump in.
Cool. So hi, everybody. Really excited to be here. My name is Ziv Keinan. I'm the CEO of Symetria. Symetria is a digital securities exchange out of Israel, who's also operating as a node on the Ownera P2P network, connecting to institutional investors worldwide. And I'm just transitioning out of Ownera as the COO of Ownera. And again, really exciting to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Graham, the co-founder and CEO of Archax. We're a London-based digital securities exchange. We received our regulation from the FCA around a month ago to be an exchange, broker, and custodian in the space. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Everyone, I'm Hugo, I'm the CEO and co-founder of LGO, which is one of the largest institutional-focused Bitcoin exchange. We're based out of France. We're actually regulated in France, and we're also based in the US. And we've done a few different things, from issuing the largest ICO in France in 2018 to working with the French Central Bank in their digital euro project. And I'm very excited to participate in this panel.
Hi, everybody. Seamus Donoghue. I'm from METACO. I'm the VP of Sales and Business Development. A little bit different than the rest. We're not an exchange. We are a technology provider to banks and exchanges. We basically provide them their self-custody infrastructure and the secure governance layer to manage their digital stack. We're based out of the French side in Lausanne, in Switzerland, and we've been around since about 2015.
Amazing. Thanks, folks. Let's start with tokenization. So in a webinar last week, Jay Clayton said, we used to have digital entry, we used to have stock certificates, and then we have digital entries, and it may very well be the case that all of those things become tokenized. Having known most of you guys for a few years now, we've seen this before, right? We all went through the kind of security token boom of like 2018, and there was a lot of hype, and then it died down significantly. So before talking about the future of tokenization, I want to first understand what happened. Why didn't security tokens and tokenization hit the mainstream as fast as we really thought it would?
I can start. So I like your story because it really presents well how things evolved. In 2018, I sat with a colleague and I told him, look, the digital securities world is then they called it security token is going to be the next thing. It's going to replace all the the financial system, the way that we trade, the way that we list securities. And let's start a law firm surrounding digital securities and do loads of money. And he basically agreed, and we started a law firm, Israeli-US law firm surrounding digital securities, and then crypto winter came about a year later, and he said, didn't you say that it's going to explode and we're going to be rich? And I said, yeah, but I didn't say when. So that's the whole story. It's just an industry that takes time to mature. It's not crypto. There's tons of regulation, and during that time, I've been doing panels year by the year of digital securities, and we started with those digital issuers, and then there was exchanges like Graham that came and exchanged, like a digital securities exchanges. So we saw the industry evolve, And now I think like we're in the peak because in this conference, just 1 hour before me, there were a representative of a big financial institution just speaking about how digital security is going to transition the traditional financial industry. So I really feel that now is a picking point, but we need to understand that this industry takes time to mature because it's operating under a lot of regulation.
Yeah, I agree with what Ziv's saying there, and I think a lot of the security token discussions were around the issuers, but to create truly transferable liquid securities, they need a lot of the industry to change as well. And because people that are operating in the industry need regulation, you need to get the regulators on board, you need to understand how the technology is impacted by the regulation and vice versa. So it's taken a while for people to get here. Along that way, you've still had entities operating in the space. So people like Securities, who have been doing a lot of issuances and have developed their platforms along the way to becoming registered transfer agents, which add to the space. And then Ownera, the work that they've been doing on creating a network. I think all of these things are coming together, and those pieces need to come together to be able to enable people to transact in digital securities in the same way that they were cryptos.
So if I'm understanding what you guys are saying, it really just takes time, but to dive into it a little more, and we will get to some regulatory stuff, but it seems like there are flutters of activity, right? And they're primarily around the real estate space. So you'll see, once a month in CoinDesk, $500 million property gets tokenized, right? But to really ramp things up, if you had to put your finger on one thing, are we missing the infrastructure? Are we missing the regulation? Are we missing the buyers, right? We need demand, we need investors to come in, or are we missing sellers who actually want to tokenize their assets?
If I jump in here, I think we've recently had a lot of these type of conversations as what exactly are the, let's say, the frictions or the catalyst to make this market move. And I think, it's one of those things where everyone overestimates how quick it'll be in the short term and probably underestimates the pace in the long term. But I think what we see is there's still too many frictions. I mean, if we look in the context of, let's say, Switzerland or Liechtenstein, where the regulations are they've got a great set of regulations. There's no reason from a regulatory perspective this can't move. But what we see is when you go to a bank, for example, we're very focused on the institutional client base and getting banks involved in this space. And obviously they have the client base and the basic potential distribution that could be a great complement. But they don't have existing infrastructure, as in, let's say, custody infrastructure to start with. You need to manage those keys for themselves and their clients. And building a business case around the asset class is still tough because it's still very nascent in terms of sizing, how big is this, the quality of the issuers. So when they go to their senior management and try to define what the opportunity is, it's not persuasive enough to justify what they think is a fairly large investment, either from a capex or basically just from an infrastructure, opex perspective. So what we've seen the banks to get around this, I really think they need to start with crypto and say, okay, here's an observable market. We'll build a business case around that, and we'll invest in infrastructure, and that will really lower the let's say the frictions and they want to transition into the tokenized space because they have all the infrastructure in place, and it's effectively it just moves very naturally. I mean, if you can handle Ethereum ERC20 tokens, etc., you can start handling some of these tokenized securities. So I think that's one of the biggest issues we still see.
I actually don't see an issue with custody. Like, there's a lot of technology out there to doing custody on digital securities, and I guess Graham can also explain how he does custody. And there was this recent publication by the one of the regulators in the US, the controller of the coin, that basically said banks, you can custody digital assets. So I don't think the point is specifically around custody. I just think that it's if you look at securities law, for example, they've been legislated 60 years ago. After the Great Depression in the US and in other jurisdictions as well. So it is a big transition to the financial industry. They need to switch from legacy system to something which is quicker, more efficient, operating 24 hours, hours a day for 7 days a week, and adopt some of the standards that basically we've seen from the crypto industry of efficiency and global having everything on a global scale.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned property, Jason, as well, the property tends to be illiquid and benefits the most from this type of market, which is why we're seeing a lot of that. Whereas the liquid securities, they trade, frequently low cost at the moment, so it's less obvious. But once the ecosystem starts developing, a lot of those advantages of the digital become true, and that's the point when there'll be inflection, and hopefully all of these assets will move over.
So I want to ask Hugo. Ziv, you were mentioning U.S. and kind of securities law and things like that. And Hugo, you have not just experience working in. You're running one of the largest institutional exchanges, and you operate in both the U.S. And France and Europe. If I'm, tell me if I'm wrong there.
That's correct, that's correct,
yeah. You also have experience working with regulators and even the French central bank, right? So how have you found the regulation to be different in the US versus Europe right now?
Yeah, it's very different in terms of how you approach it. In the US, people have tended to use frameworks that that have been existing, to Ziv's point, for a long time. So they use securities law and they issue tokens under this kind of framework. In France and in Europe in general, it's been a bit different in the sense that regulators have tried to create bespoke setups for crypto assets, for security tokens and things like that. So there's one in France. We're actually regulated under this framework, which is called the PSAN framework. There's one in Europe, which is coming. There's one in Germany as well. So in terms of approach, you have the US where you can basically put these new assets in an existing category, and in Europe, everybody's kind of waiting for this new category this new framework to arrive. But I think there are solutions to deal with regulation, and just to come back on what's I would say the main blocker, like the main friction for the adoption of that. I would say it's infrastructure, but I would say it a bit differently. I think it's user experience. Because it's still incredibly difficult today to manipulate tokens and objects in blockchains. Like the concept of a public address, a private key, protecting that, even the concept of running a node. That's extremely difficult and for people that are not really necessarily used to that. And so I think that once we'll have this complexity, which is taken away from the operators, from the people in this market, well, that will be way easier. And I don't think that's going to come with crypto. I think that's going to come with stablecoins, because we see in Europe and especially in France, we're quite close to that. But like there's a lot of work which is done by central banks to try to issue a digital euro, a digital currency, something that runs on a blockchain. And if it comes from above, if it's a central bank that is pushing all the actors to kind of adapt to this new technology and have the infrastructure that is able to receive those tokens, send them, store them, do whatever you want with them. Well, that's an open door for security tokens and cryptocurrencies and other assets.
I would totally agree with Hugo saying. I think basically what you need is a catalyst for the banks to be motivated. And one of the things to think about it globally, I think on the payment side, basically payments account for about 37 to 40% of banks' earnings globally. And that's true in Europe. It's also been growing. It's one of the fastest areas of revenue growth for the bank. So when you have someone like Libra launching, which has obviously catalyzed all the central banks to look at the space in a much more sort of accelerated way, it's the same thing going to force the commercial banks to respond and get infrastructure to be able to respond to either disrupt their existing payments industry by adopting stable coins, and that'll give them the kind of, let's say, the end-to-end infrastructure to handle anything in the space. So I think that's definitely a very good point to point out as a catalyst.
Just keeping with regulation for a second, interesting week for regulation, right? CFTC charged BitMEX with operating an illegal derivatives platform. The SEC ordered Salt to return, I think it was like 47 million. Kik lost a case and has to return investor funds. Unicorn had to pay $6 million to SEC, right? And it goes on and on. I mean, the good thing is I think the crypto markets are much more resilient than they have been in the past. It barely impacted the market. On the flip side, this thought of like this startup cliche almost of build fast and break things, a la Facebook, a la Uber, that's really coming around to hurt several projects. How do you all balance moving fast and onboarding users while still complying with the regulators?
I can touch on that. So first, I think the first answer is, if there's a regulation, well, you just have to comply, right? I mean, that's been our motto. We've tried to do things the right way since the beginning, and it hasn't been always easy, because like we've done an ICO at a time where there was no framework for ICOs. We started operating a cryptocurrency exchange in France at the time where there was no regulation in France, but there's always been AML laws and AML directives both in France and in the US, and you have to comply with that. That's rule number one. Then for the other stuff where there's no documentation, there's no law, there's nothing, there's no precedent. Well, I think rule number one is to be knowledgeable, broadly, like and have people around you that know this kind of space. Like what can you do generally in the securities market? What can you do generally in the money transmission space? And where we want to go, where we don't want to go. So that's number one. And number two, when there's no rule, you just have to make sense. And sometimes making sense is having a discussion with the regulator, having sharing ideas with them, but working with them. And I think there's no free lunch, right? And you can see that with BitMEX. They've taken the stance of being completely outside of the US perimeter and doing whatever they wanted to do from an AML perspective, but they're paying that right now. So there's two different strategies. You choose one or the other, but I think at the end of the day, it evens out.
Does anyone else want to touch? Graham, I know you've done a phenomenal job at really building all of the pipes before just racing into it. Have you done some work with the regulators out in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I was going to say something, and Hugo pretty much said exactly the same thing. I don't actually think it's that complicated. I mean, the rules are literally written there for you to read, and sometimes you might need a lawyer and interpretation, but most people can follow them. I think and where the interesting bit and the innovation comes in the regulated space is working out what's possible with the technology, and then how that can improve financial services. And we spend a lot of our time doing that. I mean, we can look into the DeFi space or a lot of what's happening out there, and people say it's innovative. Why don't financial services run like this? And for the most part, I can say, well, it's because these guys should have 7 regulations that they're totally avoiding. And I think the trick is looking at what they're doing and taking inspiration from everything they're working on. Okay, and then think, okay, imagine we did this in the correct way with known parties following the right regulations, and then that's truly how you kind of break through to the next level.
Ziv, did you want to mention something?
Yeah, I just say I agree with Graham. I also like to see that, as I said before, like the ICO, I think it gave a lot of inspiration to the traditional securities world in the terms of the efficiency and the way that it was distributed. Those investment was distributed, and that's also going back to what you asked before about what is missing. I think a good distribution network is the key for the adoption of digital securities, not like a specific asset, not like a hotel that's being tokenized or a company that's being tokenized, but a big distribution network like the one Ownera is trying to create, which connects to institutional investors. And in those kind of situations, there's no big question about regulation, because those are all financial institutions and they comply with every regulation there is as much as they can, or they want to comply. On the other hand, if you want to look at those markets and drive inspiration, I think the DeFi market is interesting. And it's also challenging for regulators. Regulators, they know how to regulate a financial provider, financial service provider. But what do you do when it's just a code that someone put on a on a blockchain? And I think that could be a segue to your next question.
You know where I'm going. You know me well, Ziv. So yeah, DeFi. We have 8, 9, 10 minutes left. I want to talk about DeFi. You all come from the very institutional world, traditional financial world, but for the first time ever, I think we're seeing like some crazy movement in the DeFi space. Uniswap volumes past Coinbase for the first time ever in a day, and centralized exchanges, probably even more important than Uniswap volume passing Coinbase, I think, is we're seeing centralized platforms getting into DeFi. For example, FTX, which is one of the top 10 exchange, probably launched Serum, a decentralized exchange. Maybe I'd ask Hugo, or really anyone can answer this, but why are we seeing centralized platforms such as FTX, who has an incredible business model, now start to launch decentralized platforms? Aren't they maybe competing with themselves?
Yeah. So I think first there's different kinds of decentralized exchanges, and I'll touch on Serum a bit later, but I want to touch on the concept of what's an automated market maker and the likes of Uniswap, because it's an incredibly elegant solution to two problems. The first problem is, like, what do you do? How do you create yield on idle capital, or how do you create passive income on idle capital, and how do you create liquidity on assets that are not necessarily very liquid? And so with this concept of automated market maker, it's the silver bullet to solve both of these problems at the same time. So you can have an asset. There's not a lot of demand, or there's some demand, so there's not a lot of liquidity providers that can provide centralized liquidity. Well, you can provide liquidity and you can earn a passive income on your asset, and anybody can do it. And so that's extremely powerful. And I think that's an innovation that the cryptocurrency space has brought to finance in general. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years' time, we have AMMs that power liquidity on less liquid assets. So that's incredibly interesting. I think that supplements very well the business model of centralized exchanges and centralized order books that are more precise, more performant, but more expensive as well. So that's point number one. Point number two on why it would be interesting for someone like FTX to have a decentralized exchange. Well, when you look at how FTX has implemented that, I mean, it's quite interesting. Anybody can make a market. You don't need a centralized liquidity. It's actually very efficient in terms of settlement and operations. Like it's done on chain, so it's less costly. You can create a community around your exchange and have a user-owned marketplace, which is a very powerful business model these days. So, you see all those benefits of decentralized exchanges, which are the community, the almost infinite liquidity, which is brought by anyone, not necessarily specialized market maker, but really anyone. You apply that to a centralized order book infrastructure, and you have something which is much cheaper, much leaner, with the potential to touch many more people in the ecosystem. So that's I think that's the kind of direction that everyone wants to take, and that's extremely interesting.
Do you think that these automated market makers and decentralized platforms will compete directly with the more centralized platforms? For example, do AMMs put more traditional market makers out of business, or do they work hand in hand? And this can be for anyone. But.
Well, I can take that very shortly, and then I'll leave the floor. I think it's very different. It's very expensive to bring decentralized liquidity because it's very tough to make money on that. A professional market maker, to make market on a specific asset, they need volatility, they need demand, they need price discrepancies, and that doesn't come with any asset. Whereas if you want to run an AMM, you can do it on any asset. So what I think will happen is that on those assets, like for instance, the cryptocurrency space, Bitcoin or Tether or ETH, where there's a lot of volatility and a lot of demand, you have room to have specialized, centralized liquidity. And that's what people want because they're trading that. But on the other side of the spectrum, for assets that are not meant to have a lot of liquidity or don't have so much demand, so much and so much supply, like it's the AMM solution is perfect, and both can split the market this way.
I think, and looking at them both, Jason, I mean, the guys at FTX are innovators anyway. And when we were talking earlier about innovation and regulation, I kind of look over at the space and consider what should be regulated or what shouldn't. But ignoring that, Serum is an interesting project for a lot of reasons. The kind of truly decentralized nature, the fact they stepped away from Ethereum in a bit of a DeFi bubble and went onto Solana, just from a speed point of view, kind of questioning whether it all needs to be on the same chain. If you go on there now, you see there's fairly deep pools of liquidity. for a decentralized venue. So, you know, the way that I see it going is much the same as everything. You can look at what's going on there and start questioning, okay, you probably need to know both parties, both sides of the trade, and make sure you have a lot of the controls that regulation require. But if you can innovate in that direction, then that's absolutely the way it's going to go, somewhere between a regulated central exchange and everything a decentralized exchange shows is possible.
Awesome. I got the flag for the 3-minute warning here. So I've been told that they have very strict rules here. So I do want to, I want to wrap up. I want to have everyone just go around, and if you could say just where folks can find you, where folks can learn more about what you're working on, and also either your most controversial thought about the crypto space or a prediction for the next several months. We can start with anybody, but we've got 2 minutes, 30 seconds here. So.
Okay, I'll start and make it short. So first of all, you can reach me on LinkedIn. That's the way I'm usually communicating. And about my thought about the market, I'm a big believer in the securities token, digital securities ecosystem, but I'm also thinking that eventually the walls of DeFi would converge with the digital securities world. I would see the financial tools develop there to provide something which 20 years ago was very basic, like a solid 5% on your investment, are now provided, you know, only in crypto. But if you converge the world, if you can take real assets and use them as collateral on the DeFi, or if you can create similar tools, liquidity pools like was discussed before, I believe that you know, that could generate a lot of revenues and solid ways for people to invest.
I just just quickly, Jason, you can find us at Archax website, on LinkedIn or Twitter. And I guess just, you know, our main view is that this is a technology play, and at some point there's a point of inflection, and all assets are moving over to digital, not just these liquid assets.
I'd have to agree. Seamus, what about you?
Yeah, you can find us obviously same points of contact, metaco.com and Twitter and LinkedIn. I mean, I think, you know, I would say, I think the tokenization is very exciting. I think it is going to take a bit longer. And I think what we're going to see, given we're focused on banks, is we'll see the banks, all the tier 1, tier 2 banks adopt crypto as their core asset to start to really be a catalyst in the space. And I think then the tokenization space really opens wide open.
And for us, you can find us on LGO.group or on Twitter, LGO Group. And I don't know if it's a controversial opinion, but I think that within 10 years, there will be at least one country that will accept Bitcoin as an official currency.
Who's it going to be?
This I don't know.
France.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Graham, Ziv, Hugo, Seamus, and to the audience, thank you so much. I'm on Twitter at Jason Yanowitz if you want to get in touch. But this has been a great conversation. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks everyone for participating.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.